Hi, everyone. Welcome to Food Talk with Dani Nierenberg. Today, I get to chat with the executive director of the Food and Land Use Coalition, which we call Folu, and that's Morgan Gillespy. So nice to see you. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Danny. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited for this conversation.
Me too. So, can you start by telling our viewers what Folu does?
Yes, so we are a coalition in the truest sense of the word, and that means we work collaboratively with 8 international NGOs, and we work on the ground in 7 countries to transform food and land use systems. So we're trying to improve diets for people, for planet. We're trying to improve production for farmers and for nature. And we're trying to transform food systems. We want to rewire the food systems to help solve climate change and help make the world a better place.
That's great. And Food Tank, I should say, is a huge fan of all of the work you do. And we've always been happy to collaborate at different conferences. So, thank you for doing what you do.
No, and thank you. It's always been a pleasure.
One of the things that I think you do really well is you emphasize the importance of the interconnectedness of the things you just described, nature, food, land, soil, biodiversity, et cetera. Why is that so important to the organization to really make sure that that is centered?
Such a good question. We really view ourselves as systems thinkers and systems changers. And I think there's been a lot of conversation and confusion about what it means to shift a system. For us, when we think about food systems, it means everything from how we produce the food, what seeds are we growing, how are we farming these foods, into how are they being transported, how are they getting from Ethiopia to America, how are they getting from Brazil to China. Two, what are we actually eating? Is it healthy? Is it nutritious? Is it serving us? And all of the different parts that come along with that. Are farmers getting paid? Are moms having access to food that they can afford? And so when we think about shifting the system, and we think about food systems, it's recognizing that if you push on one lever over here, it's going
Mhm.
to impact things everywhere else. And so, how can we work across that system so that we move in lockstep together instead of maybe making an improvement here and seeing something negative happen over
Right.
here?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a lot
So
about silo breaking too, right? I feel like you're very good at that, like getting different groups to talk to one another.
well, it's one of those things, right? Most of us within the Folu network started from an environmental perspective. We want to contribute to reversing or halting catastrophic climate change. Well, how do you do that? You look at GHG emissions. And how do you look at GHG emissions? Well, we look at agricultural production. But then when you really start thinking about agricultural production and you start thinking about, well, the way we're producing our food is damaging soils. And when we think about the crops we're growing, we're not necessarily growing the crops that are best for human consumption. And so, if we're going to make all of this effort to halt climate change, why don't we also think about the co-benefits we can achieve
Right.
by integrating health and nutrition and diet, nature, biodiversity, and livelihoods, farmers' livelihoods, people's livelihoods as part of this work that we do? So, call it silo breaking, call it systems thinking, but really, it's about identifying the co-benefits that we believe are achievable through the lens of food systems.
Absolutely. Why aren't we growing the foods that are good for people on the planet? Why do we need to change? What has happened, over the last 70 years that sort of brought us to this place?
It's such a good question. So much progress has been made in the quantity of commodities that are produced. And that was done during the Green Revolution, years and years and years ago. And I think my message at least is at that time, we used technological innovation to boost productivity, to feed a growing population that was really struggling to get the food that they needed. And that was fantastic. That was the right thing to do at that time. What we now know, 20, 30, 40, 50 years later, is that boosting productivity through chemical inputs had some negative consequences. Soil health, water pollution, facilitating global trade was fantastic,
Right.
but it also had some negative consequences. It pushed us towards a system where we only look at a small number of commodities instead of a large, diverse amount of commodities. And so the system that we built kind of 50 years ago, which was fit for purpose back then, is no longer fit for purpose today. And so part of the work we're doing is recognizing, Danny, like how did we get here? Well, we got here actually for very good reasons. And it's not about laying blame for what happened in the past, but it's recognizing that with today's science, today's technological capabilities, today's understanding of how we can improve things, we have a moral, business, political imperative to do so.
Absolutely. Thank you for that very clear explanation. And I think it shows that like, you know, that worked at a certain time, right? You know, those green revolution technologies, and they don't, you know, you're right, they don't serve us today. And how can we really transform food systems? One thing you mentioned earlier is, you know, the price that farmers are paid. Can you talk about sort of the role small holder farmers play across the globe?
Yeah. I mean, I think looking at the farmer community, it's really important. We say, I mean, those of us in the space, we talk about businesses, we talk about policymakers, we talk about farmers. Farmers are as unique and diverse as people. There are smallholder farmers, there are SME sized farmers, there are large scale commercial farmers, there's everyone in between. But what people need to also recognize is that there's a large number of smallholder farmers that contribute a large proportion of food production. And those smallholder farmers aren't necessarily able to access technical assistance, financial support, additional support at the same levels or the same scales as some of the larger, more commercial
Right,
farmers.
right.
What that means is the kind of question about equality and equity. We need to spend a little bit more time and energy focusing on providing to the smallholder farmers than we probably do to some of the larger farmers. That's not to say larger farmers don't need support, but it's just to recognize that people need access to support in different ways. And so, how can we make sure that we're protecting, supporting, empowering some of the smallholder farmers, which are the most vulnerable, so that their lives, their wages, their production is more resilient and improved?
I like that you're framing it around equality and equity. When you're talking about funding or investment that goes towards smallholder farmers being able to fight the climate crisis, can you give us some numbers on you know what the kind of investment that they're getting now and what they actually need?
Goodness gracious. I can't give you numbers specific to smallholder farmers, but I can give you some like high level numbers. And we know that only 3 to 4% of climate finance is going to the agri-food system space. And that's wild, right? We know that
Right.
agriculture is 30 to 40% of the GHG contribution. And so we should at least be getting that much funding to solve the problem. We also know that finance across the system is really crucial. And without serious investment, the food transition simply won't scale. We know that we need about $1.3 trillion a year, but we also know, because people freak out when they hear that, right? That's a lot
Right.
of money. We also know that food system transformation could generate $4.5 trillion in returns while reducing hidden costs, which also add another $15 trillion a year to the bill. This is some of our Folu research. And so we need more money to be invested, of course, but we shouldn't look at it just as an investment opportunity. You will get a return on that investment and you
Mm-hmm.
will reduce hidden costs, hidden environmental costs, hidden health costs, hidden societal costs.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ROI says everything, that you're going to get a big return on that investment. When we're talking about hidden costs, there's this, you know, idea if we use true cost accounting in food and agriculture systems, we can eliminate some of these societal costs and, you know, of different things. Can you talk a little bit more about that? What are we really facing from those costs?
So, from a Folu perspective, when we think about the hidden costs, we do kind of bucket in these three ways. What are the health costs? And the health costs kind of split into two. In global north countries, we see rising costs due to obesity, diabetes, disease driven by overconsumption of certain food products. In lesser developed or middle income countries, we see equally concerning health implications, but due to malnutrition, not
Right.
being able to access the right amount of food, not being able to afford food. So there's health costs that are split kind of in both ways, and that's quite a large chunk. We also see environmental costs, right? And the easiest way of explaining this is that we don't really have a system where the polluter pays.
Right.
So agricultural companies now can use quite a lot of chemical fertilizers, which can ruin freshwater quality, can pollute water sources, can drive a reduction in soil health and soil quality. And over time, that reduces farmers' abilities to produce healthy, resilient crops. But there isn't really an accountability mechanism to
Right.
account for those negative externalities. So those are the environmental costs. And then I think we can also look at political or societal costs. And this really comes down to, again, not only farmer livelihoods, but everyone working within the food system.
Hmm.
So are farmers being paid a living wage? In many places, they are not. What about other workers within the food system space? And let's even take it up to sort of delivery providers or retailers. How can we make sure that there aren't hidden costs in society and people because of the system that we have built for
Mhm.
ourselves. So when we think about true cost accounting, we really want to understand what is the true cost, what is the real cost of our food, and how are we accounting for that properly?
When we're talking about, true cost accounting and accounting for these externalities, do you think that, farmers, businesses, governments understand this, or are we still sort of, living in the past?
Oh, do I think they understand? I think it's an interesting question. Do they understand it or do they want to acknowledge it?
Mm,
I think that let's dissect this question a little bit. We know that there's quite a lot of subsidies, again, particularly in large agricultural production countries, the United States, Brazil, for example, that have locked in a current system of production that is not as good as we want it to, right? Do those governments and businesses know that? Of course they do. Do they
mhm.
want to change it? Maybe. Is it easy to change these sort of locked-in subsidy regimes? Probably not so much. We've done some interesting research that has shown, I'm just trying to pull up the figures now, that if we were to sort of shift production in the beef value chain in Brazil
Hmm.
to meet mitigation targets, the cost of that transformation would be as high as 17% of a farmer's revenue.
Wow.
17%,
Yeah.
but would just be 3% for a trader, for a regional trader, and it would be less than 1% for a global food company. So that's like really simply the value chain, right? You have the farmer, you have
Sure.
the trader, and then you have the kind of retailer. So for the same transformation, the costs hit differently dependent on where you are in the system. And so then there's a question there. How do governments navigate that? Do they need to
Right.
provide more financial support to farmers and less to the businesses? Maybe, but the businesses are the ones generating the revenue, right? They're the
Right.
ones selling
Right.
the products. So these are some of the complicated questions and trade-offs we think about and try to
Yeah.
solve for when we're thinking about this. A lot of people say food systems are complex. I'm like, are they complex? It's not that they're complex. It's that we've built a system that has unequal power structures, unequal revenue structures, and rebalancing that requires some people to win a little and some people to lose a little.
Right.
And that's a political conversation
Yeah.
that's always challenging to have.
Yeah, it goes back to what you said about equity and equality. I want to take a step back because I think it's important that we, our listeners and viewers understand that, it's only recently that food and agriculture systems have really been a huge, a bigger part of the climate crisis conversation. Can you talk about why we ignored food systems before?
No, I can't. I have no idea why we ignored food systems from before, but I can tell you how we
I
got to
don't
where we
either.
got to. Do you know? No, it's such a good question. Why did we talk about food systems? I think no, it's a bit of a facetious sort of response, right? But I think when we first started talking about climate change, there was a lot of focus on GHG emissions reduction, right? And that was probably the right way to focus. We wanted to hit 1.5 degrees, 70% of emissions are energy driven. Let's focus on energy. It has taken time to build out awareness on different elements of our global economy and how climate change is affecting people. And there's
Hmm.
been a recent focus on nature. And I think it started with COP26 with the UK government focused on forests. Now, from that forest focused COP, which was a huge step forward, we were able to broaden that into a food systems narrative and a food systems discussion. And I think we were all thrilled at COP28, where food finally made it on the scene,
Right.
primarily through the UAE Declaration on Food Systems. There was maybe a bit of a dip, if I could say that, in
Sure.
COP29, but we're thrilled that COP30 is really going to be yet another unique point, turning point on food systems. I mean, hopefully, I think everyone is aware of this, maybe not. But the Brazilian government just a few weeks ago released their very ambitious action agenda. It has 6 pillars in it, and one of the 6 pillars focuses squarely on food systems. They have 3 sub-elements. One is on land restoration, one is on adaptation, and one is on food security. Now, this is, Dani, the most comprehensive inclusion of food systems that we've
Right.
seen to date in a COP. And we are also seeing a very, very strong commitment to drive implementation, which is like very, very exciting. So COP26 forests, COP28 food systems, COP30, now another opportunity to really drive forward the work that we've been building towards.
And for those of you who don't know, COP is the UN climate change conference that happens every year in different places all over the world. And Morgan mentioned Glasgow. She mentioned the UAE. And again, this coming COP will be in Brazil, which is very exciting. Are you hopeful, Morgan, about COP 30?
I am hopeful for COP30, and there's a few reasons for that. I think number one, Brazil is really at the forefront of food systems transformation. I mean, there's many countries doing amazing work, but Brazil is really kind of a leader. They have very ambitious national initiatives on sustainable agriculture and ecosystem restoration programs. They have also, which I think is super, super cool, they've set the global stage with this global alliance against hunger and poverty, which was launched at the G20 in 2024.
Hmm.
So just a little bit like, why do these things matter? The Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty has 140 different founding members and 82 countries on board. What it's trying to do is it's framed as sort of a strategic policy basket where they match proven instruments like cash transfers, school meals, family farming, and they match that support to the countries in need. They have made a commitment to reach 500 million people by
Wow.
2030. And so what we have is Brazil hosting a COP, but Brazil also hosting international initiatives such as this Global Alliance and really strong domestic policies focused on resilient regenerative agriculture. And so
Right.
that gives them, I think, legitimacy to act in this space in a way that other countries might not have. So for those reasons,
Yeah.
I'm kind of excited. One other thing, they've also made very clear that this is an implementation COP. So
Hmm.
we've heard that across the board from different members of the COP30 presidency. This is not a COP for yet more vague commitments or
Right.
target setting. They are all about implementation, implementation, implementation. And that's again kind of quite a big shift from what we've had in previous COPs that gives me hope.
Yeah, same. I feel the same. There is some hope here. Going back to the private sector, how do you make the business case for food system transformation? You mentioned, the cost of food system transformation can be very little for a lot of the private sector, but how do you convince them to really get in there and do it?
I mean, again, this is it's a tough question, and I feel like I have a positive response and a slightly negative response.
Hmm.
The slightly negative response is we haven't cracked the business case yet, right? And we're doing a lot of work right now on Folu on exploring end-to-end value chain transformation. And some of the challenges we found through stakeholder interviews is that a lot of folks think the current system is working for them. A
Right,
lot of
right,
incumbent businesses are like, what? What's like not that bad. And whilst we're seeing sort of early signs of climate risk, of physical climate risk, people's supply chains are diversified enough that they're able to mitigate that.
right, right,
The regulatory risk hasn't really come to fruition yet. And so, is the business case really there? The counter argument to that is the evidence is very clearly mounting that food and ag companies face serious climate and nature related risks. We have strong evidence now that shows that companies investing in things such as regenerative agriculture are making supply chains more resilient.
hmm
And there's increasingly large evidence to show the return on investment here. Um, and so I think there's kind of a risk and opportunity sort of narrative, which is we're at the early stages of seeing perhaps like a really accelerated
yeah,
transformation process. And part of the work that we as Folu and we as broader civil society organizations need to do is to elevate these successful business stories and to scale them quickly so that
right.
others understand what the business opportunity is, how they can capitalize on it, and how they can scale it within their own operations.
And are you hopeful that businesses will make these changes and get on the other side of this in a positive way? But I mean, and I'm going to just ask it very bluntly, kind of before it's too late, before, there's no going back.
Um, yes. My short answer is yes. I think in capital markets, it's a dog eat dog world, right? And so the businesses that don't transition will go out of business. Interestingly, I think it was just last week, Del Monte, I don't know if you know that brand is an American, the old
Yep.
pineapple,
Yep.
they went bankrupt. They went out of business.
Yep.
completely gone. They've been around for what, 20, 30, 40 years. Very strong American brand. There's been lots of interesting debate online as to why it happened, but the short answer was lots of folks in the food, lots of players in the food space have transitioned to fresh, nutritious food, and they're primarily a canned food provider. And they weren't able to capitalize on the needed transition. And we've seen examples like this from other sectors. You know, it's like the business case study with Kodak films going out of business. So our business is going to transition in time. I think yes. If they don't, I think they'll go out of business. And it's
Yeah.
really maybe as simple as that.
And just to be clear, not all canned food is bad. There's a, the Del
Canned
Monte
food
put a
is
lot of
great.
fruit into like syrup and it was highly sugary and, not that great for folks.
But canned food in principle is also fantastic. There's absolutely nothing wrong with canned food, and that was part of the challenge. How was Del Monte not able to capitalize
Right.
on the benefits of canned food,
Right.
um, and you know,
And the access
and
and
make that
affordability of
transition?
it. Yeah, no, it's such an interesting case study. I want to talk a little bit about Folu's positive tipping points report. And I think, for a lot of advocates in this space, they're sort of wary of incremental change because they think the pace of change is too slow. I'm a big
Mm.
fan of mass incremental change and all of these sort of bright spots or tipping points that report mentions can add up to a lot. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I like your frame, Danny, actually, and I will quote Nigel Topping, who I was fortunate enough to work with in a past life at CDP. And he always said, like, when you look at an S curve, and I apologize for folks that are listening in, but an S curve is basically flat for a really long time, and then it turns up really, really quickly. And so for a really long time, you look like it's incremental change, right? It's like just kind of going flat. You keep
Right,
going, you keep going, you keep going. What's cool about tipping points is at some point, it goes like this, bing, and it shoots straight up. And you might not know exactly when that moment's going to happen, and
right,
you might not know where you are on the S curve if you're here or if you're closer to where that's happening. But I agree with you. A lot of incremental change, a lot of moving the system in lockstep together will result in tipping points. And again, there's analogies we've seen in the energy space with the price being brought down on solar panels, in alternative proteins, we're seeing kind of price parity come on
right,
play. You know, all of these small incremental changes do result in tipping points. And like the magic is being able to understand how you can influence the system to accelerate those tipping points, or you're able to prime the system to respond positively to these changes
right.
instead of pushing back against them.
Yeah. You mentioned tipping points in the energy sector. Are there lessons that we can learn from, the energy folks that will benefit how we sort of frame food and agriculture conversations at COP or the UN Food Systems Summit stock take event that's coming up in 2.5 weeks?
Yes, I really, really, really think so. And again, this is something that we've been exploring a lot with this value chains project we've been working on. In the clean energy transition, we knew what good looked like, right? Get out of coal, get into renewables. But in food, it's a lot murkier. Investors kind of know they should be avoiding deforestation, but do investors know what they should be investing in
Mm-hmm.
instead?
Mm-hmm.
The answer to those questions depends on kind of the specific value chain that you're talking about. And again, that's the same in energy. It's a different sort of conversation if you're looking at hydro, if you're looking at nuclear, if you're looking at wind. And we need to get comfortable in the food system space, recognizing that each of the value chains that we're talking about or each of the production zones that we're talking about are going to need a slightly unique and different response. Um, what's better in Brazilian soy, for example, looks very different than what's better in UK beef. And that
Sure.
is okay, right? And we need to stop making that sound like a scary, complex conversation
Mm-hmm.
and just recognize that similar to energy that have all these different transformations to get to one guiding star, we are going to need a lot of different transformations to get to one guiding star, right? So what do we need to do to replicate energy? What do I think we need to do? Have more honest conversations around what a guiding star of transformation is, and then be able to build on that by focusing on transition pathways, recognizing that we're not going to need one transition pathway. We're not going to need two transition pathways. We may need a multitude of transition pathways to get us there. And for Folu, that guiding star needs to be access to safe, healthy, affordable food, production that is regenerative, restorative, that is replenishing water, soil,
Mm-hmm.
emissions, and making sure that people are centered at the heart of it, both from a health and nutrition and from a livelihoods perspective. If those are our guiding stars, that's where we're trying to get to. It starts to become a little bit easier to look at the science, the planetary boundaries, all the great science that we have on figuring out how to get there. So for me, that's the corollary. Energy has an endpoint and they figured out their pathways.
Yeah,
Food systems needs to agree on that endpoint and
right.
get to work figuring out those pathways.
Yeah, it sounds like a good plan. Easier said than done, I'm sure. Morgan, as we wrap up, I want to give you a chance to talk about Folu's 2030 strategy, what you're planning. I know there's a lot focused on sort of plant-centered diets. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so we are really, really thrilled that the coalition is going to continue for another 4 years. We have recently launched our Folu 2030 strategy, which outlines what this coalition will be working towards over the next 4 to 5 years. And we're centering on four key pathways. Number one, national and subnational policy shifts, right? So making sure that the right policies are backed by people on the ground that will enable this broader food systems transformation. Number two, working at landscape level to deliver lasting change. So
Hmm.
for us, that means in Colombia, working in different departments. In Kenya, we work in counties. In India, we work at the state level, but bringing multi-stakeholder groups together, businesses, farmers, communities, and governments to build a shared vision of transformation and then implement that at that scale. Number three, value chain transformation. So we talked about this a lot already today, but how do we drive end-to-end value chain transformation? And for us, it's figuring out that guiding star and then building the transition pathways to achieve it. And the last piece is actually consensus building. So how can Folus support holding some of these most contentious topics so that they don't become a blocker to progress, but we start to unlock progress? One of the examples there is on the topic of regenerative agriculture, the Folu perspective, and we're a partner of Region 10. We've published a report on this, is let's focus instead on the outcomes we want. We want improved environmental outcomes. We want improved societal outcomes. We want improved farmer livelihood outcomes. And let's recognize that there's a multitude of practices that will get us there. So let's
Yeah.
stop arguing if agroecology or agroforestry or regenerative agriculture is the right thing. Let's instead focus on these outcomes, but building consensus is the fourth area. So that's going to be what we as a coalition focus on, these 8 international partners in these 7 countries. And through those four lenses, through those four pathways, we are hopeful that we'll be able to deliver lasting change and contribute in some small way to rewiring this food system.
I love it. I think you are rewiring the food system. Thank you so much, Morgan. Where can people find out more information about Folu?
Yeah, you can hit up our website, www.foodandlandusecoalition.org. You can follow us on LinkedIn, myself or many of our teams. We also have LinkedIn and Foley websites for each of our country platforms, which are in Colombia, Brazil, Kenya, Ethiopia, India, Indonesia, and China. So if you're in any of those countries or working globally, feel free to reach out and we're very happy to connect.
Thank you so much, Morgan. Great to see you.
Such a pleasure, Dani. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You too.